All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. We're going to trace the exact moment football completely transformed. It went from a pretty straightforward sport into this massive, highly commercialized, and honestly, profoundly corrupt global enterprise. Today, we're looking at a pivotal juncture in sports history, a moment that fundamentally rewrote the rulebook, not just on the pitch, but straight up in the boardroom.
So, when did football actually become corrupt? When you think of corruption in this sport, your mind probably jumps straight to those explosive scandals of the 2010s, right? The dramatic hotel raids, the massive headlines. But if we really want to answer this, we've got to rewind way further back. While modern fans kind of focus on those recent events, the true foundational shift happened just before the 1974 World Cup, and it all went down at a highly contentious, incredibly dramatic election in Frankfurt. 1974. To really get this shift, we have to put ourselves in the global mindset of that year. It was defined by intense Cold War paranoia and the heavy economic hits of global oil shocks. It was a tense time everywhere. But for football governance, 1974 marked an absolute point of no return. The game was literally about to leave its amateur roots in the dust forever and step into a much darker, much more lucrative era.
Part 1. The Old Guard, Stanley Rous.
So Stanley Rous had comfortably reigned as FIFA's president since 1961, and he brought a very traditional philosophy to the global game. In later years, it became super popular to paint him as this tweedy, out-of-touch, upper-class aristocrat. But actually, scratch that, it's deeply unfair to his history. Rous was in fact a grocer's son. He worked as a schoolteacher and only took up refereeing because a broken wrist totally ended his amateur goalkeeping career. And his impact on the actual mechanics of football absolutely staggering. He basically rewrote the laws of the game back in 1938 to make them easier to digest. Even wilder, he devised the diagonal referee positioning system to optimize sightlines, and referees literally still use that all over the world today. He was a true football man. He even earned a knighthood for his pro bono work organizing the 1948 London Olympics. But despite this incredible resume, his deep love for rulemaking came with a super rigid worldview.
Rous clung rigidly to this concept of political neutrality. Now, that might sound like a noble goal on the surface, but there are times when refusing to take a stance is, in itself, a profoundly political act. This stubbornness really cost him critical support in Africa, especially when he completely refused to support a boycott against apartheid South Africa. His argument? He claimed it was merely an internal matter for the country. Yeah, not a great look.
Part 2. The Challenger, Joao Havelange.
Rous's stubbornly old-school approach and his total refusal to adapt to a changing moral landscape basically opened the door wide open for a challenger who deeply understood modern geopolitical leverage. And this completely illustrates the sheer contrast between our two main guys. On one side, you have Rous, the traditional English rulemaker who firmly believed the sport should stay far away from global politics. He totally relied on the tradition of his office to keep him in power. On the flip side, you've got Havelange, a shrewd Brazilian sports powerbroker who treated the FIFA presidency like a high-stakes political campaign. He was perfectly willing to use absolutely whatever leverage necessary to get the win.
Now, you've got to notice the intense irony of Havelange's public persona versus his actual reality. During the campaign, Havelange successfully portrayed himself as this anti-colonial champion, someone fighting for the developing nations against the old European imperialists like Rous. But look at his actual background for a second. He was the son of a Belgian arms dealer. He competed as a swimmer in the 1936 Berlin Olympics and spoke warmly of Nazi Germany. Plus, he maintained extremely close ties with the authoritarian military regime in his home country of Brazil. But somehow, he managed to flip the narrative entirely to his advantage. It's kind of wild.
Part 3. Buying the FIFA presidency.
This brings us directly to the unprecedented campaign tactics used to completely upend that 1974 Frankfurt Congress. These were tactics the football world had quite literally never seen before. Taking Rous completely by surprise, because remember, Rous didn't even think he needed to actively campaign, Havelange went totally on the offensive. He aggressively campaigned by paying for delegates from poorer nations to actually attend the Congress. Now, on paper, ensuring every member gets a say sounds incredibly democratic, right? But this wasn't just covering basic economy flights in a standard hotel room. Oh no. Havelange was showering delegates with absolute luxury travel, lavish spending allowances, and if that wasn't persuasive enough, handing out literal envelopes of cash.
To give you some hard proof of the sheer scale of this operation, let's look at a single data point. The vote of the Venezuelan delegate alone was bought for exactly $25,000. Think about that for a second. In 1974, that was a staggering amount of money just to secure one single vote in a sports administration election.
So where on earth did all this money come from?
Well, it was funded by a mix of really shadowy backers. This included Horst Dassler, the highly influential owner of Adidas, and interests directly linked to money laundered from a recently collapsed Portuguese dictatorship. But this aggressive spending spree eventually caught up with him back home. The Brazilian junta actually launched an investigation into the Brazilian Sports Confederation, which Havelange had been running, and they discovered a massive $6.6 million embezzlement shortfall. It was so bad it literally forced a state bank bailout to cover the stricken federation.
Now here's the crucial point. Even with all this blatant corruption, the election wasn't actually a landslide. Just look at how tight that dramatic Frankfurt vote was. In the first round, Havelange only led 62 to 56. It was entirely too close for comfort. But he managed to expand his margin in the second round to 68 to 52, officially dethroning the Englishman and taking total control of world football.
Part 4. The birth of modern FIFA.
With that final vote, absolutely everything changed. As the first non-European president in FIFA's history, Havelange immediately ushered football into a brand new era. But he had a problem. He had to figure out how to consolidate this new power. I mean, how do you keep the people you just bought happy? Simple. By continuously expanding the organization to hand out political favors. He dramatically increased the number of FIFA committees, basically creating positions that required very little actual work but paid incredibly well, strictly to reward his loyal supporters. He also introduced the new Youth World Cup and expanded the main World Cup to 24 teams by 1982. Now, on their own, expanding the game wasn't a bad move for the sport at all, but structurally, every new tournament and every new team meant additional opportunities to hand out favors, award fat contracts, and solidify his patronage network.
Watch how quickly this builds into the financial juggernaut we know today. After winning the presidency in '74, Havelange quickly realized he needed someone to manage the commercial side of this rapidly expanding empire. So, in 1975, he hired a thrusting young PR executive from a Swiss watch company. His name? Sepp Blatter. Blatter wasted zero time, quickly securing a pioneering, massive commercial partnership with Coca-Cola. This singular move permanently linked the sport to corporate mega-marketing and completely opened the floodgates for global sponsorships.
Under Havelange and Blatter, Rous's relatively simple sporting body had officially morphed into a massive money-making machine, and it operated entirely on clientelism. Basically, a system completely bound by a culture of political patronage where votes were guaranteed through financial favors, lucrative committee appointments, and a classic you scratch my back, I scratch yours methodology that became the literal DNA of the organization.
To wrap this explainer up, we're left with a truly fascinating historical what-if. Look, the commercialization of global sports was historically inevitable, right? Television rights and sponsorships were always going to find their way to the world's most popular game. But we really have to ask ourselves, if those literal envelopes of cash hadn't worked in Frankfurt in 1974, if Sir Stanley Rous had held on to power, would the commercial boom have arrived with a completely different emphasis? Would the global game we love today have a fundamentally different moral compass? It's a massive question, and it's one that still echoes through the halls of football governance today.